Robbie Williams Rewind.
Welcome to Robbie Williams Rewind. We are the champions. I'm Matt.
And I'm Lucy.
And along with help from special guest fans, we take you on an in-depth rewind through the solo career of multi-award winning singer, songwriter and entertainer Robbie Williams.
Today's very special guest has been intrinsic to Robbie's career from the very start. He's an A&R man who's worked with ABC, Blondie, Leppard, Straits, Big Country, Olly Murs, Marling, Starsailor, Geri Halliwell and many more. He's been Rob's A&R man from 1997 right up to the present day. He won A&R of the Year at the Music Producers Guild's Awards in 2016. It's the one and only Chris Briggs.
Hi, Chris. Thanks
Hi.
for joining us. Well, thanks for welcoming us to your place.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So, tell us, starting from the beginning, how did you end up becoming an A&R man?
So music, like a lot of people of my generation, music was the most important thing. All my mates at school, we were obsessed with music. It actually goes back further. My father's elder brother, after World War II, got involved in coin-operated machines. So he was distributing jukeboxes and fruit machines in the 50s in London. And when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, at the weekend, he'd pick my father and myself up and we'd drive around some of the locations his machines were in South London and he would change the records on the jukeboxes. So we'd go to some of the clubs where he had fruit machines. And I realized many years later, there was a reason for taking a child with you to some of these clubs.
Yeah.
Some of the people that ran the clubs weren't, let's say, there might have been some dodginess. But with a kid in the room, nothing ever went off. Those were the rules back then. So, which my mother hated. And I just, it didn't, as a child, none of that stuff matters to you. But what used to happen is he'd take the records off the jukeboxes, put a few in a box and give them to me. And so by the time I was 9 or 10, I had a very good record collection. And because a lot of it's in South London, a lot of it is early soul and R&B and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So I didn't get English pop music. I got Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley.
Right.
He had some West End clubs where they might have blues on the jukeboxes. And he'd put those, a label called Pie International used to do EPs of like John Lee Hooker, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf. So as a 10-year-old, that's what I'm listening to.
Right.
So I became obsessed with music. And like everybody else of that era, my age, I learnt to play the guitar quite badly. I was too lazy, really. All the people that I knew that became successful musicians really grafted, practiced every day, were really dedicated to it. I thought that you'd be struck by lightning because you had good ideas in your head, and magically be good. So I can still play the same 37 chords I could play when I was about 14. But it meant that my interest in music was absolutely, I knew that's all I wanted to be involved in. I mean, even like going to college, the first thing I always thought was, you could put bands on in here.
Yeah.
So where I ended up doing A-levels, which was what was then called Ewell Technical College, near Epsom. And somebody I'd just met, Paul Conroy, who also was in the music business, he ran Virgin for a long time. We started promoting bands. So then we're starting to meet agents. So, and then I go to university and he becomes an agent.
Right.
He drops out. He goes to art school. This is Paul. He goes to art school, doesn't like it, drops out, gets a job as a booking agent. So I'm now at Leicester University. I use Paul as my booking agent and various people. It was it was like one business back then, the live side, the manager of the record companies, there wasn't the separation there is now. And people would just turn up. So he'd turn up with like 3 or 4 people from London that just fancied coming out to a gig in Leicester at the weekend. And we did very well. You know, we got people really early. It was a decent sized hall, Leicester. And we had a really good run. We had, and we weren't competing. There was only the De Montfort Hall. So the university, for sort of anything a bit more underground, was it. It was, and the Poly actually did, Leicester Poly also did, but not on the scale we were doing it. Anyway, so somebody came up with Paul, a guy called Glenn Colson, whose sister ended up managing Peter Gabriel, Chrissie Hynde.
Yeah.
I still talk to Gail. They, Glenn came up, and he was a very, very entertaining bloke, and he was the press officer for Charisma Records, but not like any other press officer you've ever met. He had a unique approach to his job, like anti-PR. Anyway, we all got on terribly well, and I'm coming to, my finals, and he said to me, what are you doing, when you leave here? I said, I haven't got a clue. My father wants me to be a lawyer or an accountant. He said, what do you want? I said, I want to work in music somehow. And I think if I was going to give anyone any advice about getting into the music business, just take the first job you're offered and then figure your way out to where you want to go from there.
Yeah.
Don't imagine you're going to go straight through the door into the job you want. And I thought at that point I wanted to be a record producer. Again, I've got the attention span of a moth. So, and also back then, you really, without some engineering experience, and in order to become Glyn Johns, you really needed to have been the T-boy age 15, and worked your way through the system.
Right.
And I'm 21 with a degree.
Yeah.
No one's going to take me on as that. And, I think back then you sat on night reception until the engineer was ill one night. And then you might get on a session.
Right. If
you weren't clueless, you might get on another one.
Yeah.
But the dropout rate was very high. There were a lot of applications for that one night receptionist T-boy job that might lead you one day to being a record producer. I don't have the patience.
Right.
Was lazy the right word? Anyway, neither here nor there. So, I start at Charisma Records as the assistant press officer, and I'm offered the job because, in Glenn's own words, he said, we need someone who can spell. You've got a degree, hopefully you can spell. And I ended up doing the biographies for all the artists. And then because I was interested in photography, I got involved with getting the photographers organised.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely, I spoke to some journalists, so I started doing PR. And then Glenn fell out with Tony Stratton-Smith, the owner of Charisma Records, because he wanted to go and watch a lot of cricket in the summer.
Yeah.
And Strat, for some weird reason, wanted him to be in the office working. So I'm sat there on my own one afternoon wondering where Glenn is, and Strat wandered in after lunch, the start of his day. He probably just eaten at Wheeler's in Old Compton Street. And said, Glenn is leaving us. I guess you're the press officer now, Chris. So it became a permanent, what I thought was probably something that might last me up till Christmas.
Yeah.
As a fill-in job.
Yeah.
Suddenly I'm the press officer at Charisma Records. And I'm out every night. Either in the 100 Club or the Marquee Club. There's a group of us. Some, the people that are really fans, right? So there's a group of journalists, some of the record producers that work with Charisma, and we just go and see loads and loads of bands.
Yeah.
So, and Paul does as well. So Paul, by now, there's a Charisma agency by now, and Paul Conroy's running it. So we're out every night, and we might see 2 or 3 bands a night. And we start going back to Strat and going, God, we saw this great band last night. And of course, he's not interested in what 3 Herberts think. But we sort of become unofficial talent scouts.
Yeah.
This is a long story, sorry. And Strat buys a magazine called Zigzag, run by Pete Frame and John Tobler. And being Strat, he sees an opportunity to get anyone who can spell to write for it for nothing.
Right.
And Pete and John used to run a system where if a band came up they thought was interesting that they weren't fans of, they'd get somebody else to interview them. And they had a generic name, Mac Gary, for whoever did that. And it was sometimes you went with Pete. And I think the first thing they did, they thought they should interview Spirit, but neither of them were fans. And I knew Spirit's work really well. So I started writing for Zigzag. I go to interview Dave Mason, who's left Traffic. And the press officer is Christine Eldridge. Her husband is Roy Eldridge, who's the press officer at Chrysalis Records. And he wants to replace himself.
Right.
And they will pay me properly, which Strat, bless him, who I love dearly, wasn't. So I go to Chrysalis, and Roy has the same ambition. Roy really wants to be an A&R guy. The A&R guy that's in London, a guy called Roger Watson, wants to move to Los Angeles, where Terry Ellis has opened a new Chrysalis office, and the door opens for Roy and me to do A&R.
Oh, wow. It's all about who you know.
Well, I think serendipity plays an awfully large part in it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't actually know any of these people.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's like you're focused on something you want to do.
Yeah.
So I basically started I was still running the press office at Chrysalis, but I was out every night at the Hope and Anchor or Dingwalls or,
Yeah.
the Nashville or all these. And coming back. And then eventually we have an A&R meeting where I said, and Chris Wright, bless him, doesn't want to sign anything that I'm interested in. So, I think a big turning point is Chris goes into business with George Martin and they become partners in Air Studios.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And because I'm the one that's interested, Chris says to me, you should go down to Air Studios and try and meet some of the people that work there. I think this is in terms of how things progress and develop, the most important thing that happened to me was meeting Chris Thomas and Bill Price, who were working, they were working on a Roxy Music record, I think. Or was it a Brian Ferry solo album? Anyway, they were quite happy for me to sit at the back. I'd had some studio experience. I'd befriended Blackhill, Peter Jenner, and I used to go up to Abbey Road and sit at the back on Roy Harper records with John Leckie engineering and Pete producing. And quite often Dave Gilmour playing guitar or Jimmy Page playing guitar. And I used to ask a lot of questions. So you kind of absorb, the knowledge. You get a language where you understand something about what they're doing. So you're not just coming in and going, oh, I don't like the sound of this. You actually have some insight into the process. But again, my short attention span, I see what a producer does. I think they've been sat here for 12 hours doing one vocal. This poor bloke sung the song 32 times. I don't think this is for me. I think I want to come in at the end of the day and just hear the best vocal.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the job I want. So as things develop and you get to know more people, your address book fills up with producers, engineers, people that run studios, musicians. You might work with a band. You think, God, this bass player's great. Maybe we can use him on some other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you go to a rehearsal and the band aren't very good, but the drummer's absolutely brilliant. You think, I better get this drummer's phone number. So I don't think this band are going anywhere and he's going to be out of work soon. And you build up a network.
Yeah.
You just have an address book with a lot of useful people in
Right.
it. And then you meet artists or bands, and sometimes it's not the complete thing. There's somebody missing or a couple of people missing. So what evolves is this thing where you're basically putting teams together. We are forming bands, whether there's a band there or not. You're sort of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Robbie Williams was a band called Robbie Williams.
Yeah.
That's how it started. This thing where people that aren't in bands, write with 100 different writers and work with 30, we didn't do that.
No.
We put a team together and made the whole record with that team.
Right.
Which back then, with somebody from Rob's background, wouldn't have been how a lot of people would have done it. But because I've sort of come from a sort of more of a sort of rock and indie band background,
Yeah.
that was my instinct.
Yeah.
Was to get a team of people that would evolve into something and develop, rather than just go to the existing hardened pros
Yeah.
and hope you get hit.
Yeah.
I mean, the music business is that you basically, there are a number of writers with a successful track record, and you buy a lottery ticket. You put your artist in with them for a day or two, and you buy a lottery ticket for a hit.
Yeah.
That's how it's configured now.
Right. So can you explain to listeners who may not know exactly what an A&R person does? So what's your role been?
Okay, well, there's a lot of different ways of doing A&R. So you always, most A&R people start off as some sort of talent scout, and if you introduce something that gets signed and it actually is commercially successful, you're upgraded in the A&R department.
Yeah.
And if you can repeat the trick, because a lot of people only do it once. There's a lot of one goal A&R men over the years. But if you repeat the trick, people go, oh, actually, he might know what he's doing. And it becomes your full-time job. And the studio side is not something every A&R man's interested in. And it doesn't make you a bad A&R man if you're not, because I think finding the raw talent and seeing something that 10,000 hours later is going to be great, it's a skill in itself.
Yeah. And
I don't think, you shouldn't, I don't think you're cleverer for knowing about the studio. It's just what interested me.
Right.
The whole recording process, I get a sort of zen feeling. I just love recording studios.
Right.
There's something about recording studios. I'm completely relaxed in a way I'm not probably anywhere else. It's a very comfortable environment. I like the whole process of recording and not having to sit there for 30 hours doing all the hard work. I like being to duck in and out and be involved in 4 or 5 different things at once. So it was perfect. So now, some many years later, my version of A&R is either to use the Robbie Williams model. I met Robbie on his own with some lyrics written and some melody ideas in his head.
Right.
So he doesn't have a team yet.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're starting from scratch with someone who can sing and write. And I don't think at that point Rob realised that he was a proper songwriter, because he thought you had to be able to play the guitar or the piano to be a proper songwriter.
Yeah.
Ask Hal David.
Yeah.
So that's so I suppose what I do now is I do as much or as little as is needed to get the recording finished, and hopefully something that the record company think, oh, we can do something with this, and you don't have long enough for me to explain
No, that's fine.
the detail
top line
of
is
it,
fine.
and it's not very interesting to the. I don't think it translates into interesting for the outside world.
Okay.
But it sounds like quite a multi-skilled job.
It is. You've got to have an ear.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to hear in time and in tune. So, and you've got to have a language. I suppose you have to have absorbed some language so that the producers and the engineers just don't think, oh, God, another moron from a record label telling us what he thinks, like we care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to have some sort of credibility, I suppose, to do it. But mine comes from, it's not, I was genuinely interested. I was fascinated by it.
Right.
Just a bit lazy.
So you mentioned then that you met Rob on his own to begin with. How did that come about? How did you first meet Rob? How did that connection come?
Okay, so I'd, like everybody else, it was impossible to avoid the Take That drama.
Yeah.
So I knew that Rob had left or been fired or whatever version of events.
Yeah.
I'd worked at A&M and Phonogram, which is now called Mercury. And there was a press officer there. We were good friends. We'd worked together a lot. and he'd gone independent, a guy called Chris Poole. And at that point, sort of mid-90s, he's in partnership with Alan Edwards. And they've worked, my connection to the back then is they've worked with Blondie, who I worked with at Chrysalis. I tour managed Blondie's first tour here. And Chris took Rob on as a client when he left Take That. Has this ever come up before?
I don't think so, no.
Right, so Chris is a very experienced press guy, and he spots that Rob's already in a bit of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm introduced to Rob more for health reasons than for music reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Chris calls me up and says, look, I've taken Robbie Williams on as a client. I said, he said he's lovely, but he's a bit wild.
Yeah.
And he said, I think RCA don't have any interest in him whatsoever. So Chris, he's being managed at the time by the guy that worked at Creation Records.
Tim Abbott.
Yeah, so I think, but I don't know this yet.
Right.
Right.
Because no one's mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going there really as, it's a sort of semi-pro visit.
Yeah.
To suss out what states Rob's in. And at this point in my life, I have some expertise in this area, having fallen off the top of a building myself at some point in my life.
Yeah.
And I've been around a lot of people, and I kind of know how that world works.
Yeah.
And how to get yourself free of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I go around and see Rob one morning. He's living in a basement flat in Maida Vale with Jackie Hamilton Smith, who I'd met and liked. She's a little bit older than Rob. And she'd been a record producer's girlfriend whose name I can't remember. And Rob was, it was very apparent he hadn't had much kip. But we got into music very quickly. We didn't really talk about that. That was more of an elephant in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't feel I'd been there very long, and he handed me a notebook, and it's lyrics, and they're good. They're about something.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how long have you been writing? He said, I only write lyrics, I mean, and this is a very Rob thing to do. We're not sat very far away from each other, and as I'm reading the lyrics, he sings bits of the songs to me.
Yeah.
And some of them they're hooks. I mean, Guy and Steve I said, this is really good, Rob. And I said, also, you've got melody. I said, so you're a top line and lyric writer. He said, oh, I'm not a songwriter. I don't play the piano or the guitar. I said, who told you needed to play the piano or the guitar to be a songwriter? He went, well, Gary.
Of course.
Oh, okay, got it. Got it. So, and I don't think my memory of the conversation is, I don't remember me having convinced him that he's a proper songwriter. Well, I said, you're a proper songwriter. I said, Rob, you just need to meet somebody who knows thousands of chords.
Yeah.
I said, I've been here before. There are so many bands. I went through it. I gave him a list of rock bands where the singer was the lyricist and melody guy, and there was a sort of keyboard player, a guitarist, who was the genius musician, a bass player and a drummer.
Right.
Yep.
And that's how a lot of bands were.
Yeah.
The singer quite often didn't play a musical instrument. And then I think I used Lionel Bart.
Yeah.
Who's one of the better examples of someone who couldn't play the piano. And Lionel used to hire a little room with a piano in it. And the Clive and Grant Black would correct me on this if they were listening. And I think they had a piano player called Beryl or Brenda. And he'd literally sing the whole musical to her and she'd write it out.
Okay.
Okay.
Which wasn't uncommon back then.
Yeah.
And that's a very 50s way of doing things. So this process starts. So I'm working for EMI by now. Chrysalis, where I had been working, has been fully taken over by EMI, and the survivors have been inducted into the EMI. We've been sort of absorbed into EMI. And there's a little version of Chrysalis Records in a corner at EMI, but you don't feel like they're taking it that seriously.
Yeah.
So I go back. I'm working. By now, by this point, I'd been moved up to the executive floor because the guy that ran EMI in the UK, Jean-François Session, had wanted me to work on stuff other than just Christus record stuff with him. And the Ian Hansen, who was the senior lawyer at EMI, we were all on the same floor, and we were working on different things together. JF had me working on Simple Minds and one or two other things that he'd signed for the company.
Yeah.
And I had history with JF. When I worked at A&M, he ran Polydor in France, and they'd done really well in a way that often European affiliates don't, with quite English things we'd had hits with in England that don't always translate into Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in France, when I worked at A&M, we signed a singer called Sam Brown, and we signed a guy called Colin Verncombe, who has a link to Steve Power, Black, and they'd have been huge hits in Europe. So I'd had a sort of relationship with JF, which is why I think I survived the transition from Christus into EMI, because I'd had some success with JF. Anyway, I got back to the office and told them about my experience that morning meeting Robbie Williams.
Yeah.
I said, he's a very, very bright and interesting bloke. He, probably do with sort of cutting down the beer, but anyway, this started a process. At this point, Rob is signed to RCA as a leaving member of Take That. We don't really know what the story is, but they've obviously put all their money behind Gary.
Mm-hmm.
And as I dig into it deeper, talking to Chris Paul, it's obvious that they're not that interested in Rob. And JF becomes fixated on signing Rob.
Ah.
Right? And it's a lot of money, so it's not a deal I can do. And this is again the reality of A&R. You've talked to a lot of A&R people, and you'd think they, wrote the theme tune, sang the theme tune. The reality is, it's a team job.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of different people's skills to get things over the line. And a deal to get the complexity of smuggling Rob out of RCA without them realizing he was interesting, and doing, because he's already famous and has had success, so it's not a cheap deal.
No.
Right.
So it's a managing director sign off,
Right.
not just some A&R consultant.
Right.
So between JF, Ian Hansen, and myself, we get this. We get it done, and it took a long time, and it's not that interesting a story. And Tim Abbott, was then I think he must have met Rob in the Oasis Glastonbury experience.
Yeah.
And Tim, who I actually found to be fine to deal with, was not. He didn't pretend to be an experienced manager. He would say that he needed help and advice. He was quite humble, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
But Tim and Rob's relationship didn't last. Rob's instincts, and Rob is a very intuitive person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very in the moment.
Yeah.
Even before he mended himself, everything was very, very spontaneous. And he just didn't see Tim as his long-term future. But that's probably another question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robbie Williams, and you're listening to Robbie Williams Rewind with the Champions.
So when Rob was first signed contractually, he wasn't allowed to release anything for a while due to the terms of him leaving BMG. So I think you spent that time developing him as an artist. Yeah, well,
I alluded to this earlier. Rob could, was, if you looked at it if you use the band analogy, Rob was the singer, lyricist, top line writer.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for a brilliant musician who could write. Someone that would really. And at the time, it was an era of musical snobbery.
Mm-hmm.
So various people at EMI would say to me, "Oh dear, Chris, this is career suicide for you. You've always done things that were a bit cooler than this." And I'm like, I've never looked at it like that. I look at things as good or bad.
Right.
And the win is if I subjectively love it.
Yeah.
But I said, no. I said, you're completely wrong about this. And there were various people in my head, and this is only a generalization, I thought someone that had already been in a band, who'd had some experience, and either the band had broken up or they hadn't wanted that life. I mean, there are people you meet all the time that have been in bands. Steve Power, a classic example. He didn't want that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So he reinvented himself as a record producer. He preferred being,
In the studio.
working in a studio and being near somewhere he could go home to.
Yeah.
He didn't like being in a band. And he didn't take himself that seriously as a musician, Steve. I thought he was a very good guitarist, but he didn't see himself like that. Anyway, Steve Power had recorded Black, Wonderful Life. And I'd met Guy. I found myself in kitchens because I'm not very gregarious. So if I go to a party, I usually regret it. I don't drink. So I'm in the kitchen looking for a Diet Coke. And the other person in the kitchen avoiding talking to me was Guy. And this happened to me 2 or 3 times with Guy. And then someone took me in the Groucho Club, another place I don't go because it involves getting very, very drunk. And there's Guy playing the piano. And I'd also run into him at Rack Studios when his band were recording the Lemon Trees with Jack Joseph Puig. And I couldn't believe all the equipment Jack had. So I'd met Guy and we'd chatted. So he was sort of in my head. And I was trying to follow intuitively because this only works. You can't force some pop writer onto an artist just to get hit. I mean, it might work once or twice, but it's going to blow up in your face.
Yeah.
Unless that artist feels instinctively he's doing the right thing or she's doing the right thing or they're doing the right thing, it is not going to last.
Yeah.
So you're putting people in front of Rob and seeing what happens next, right? So there's an element, even when you've done this for a long time and you've had some success, there's an element of trial and error because you can cast people together who on paper are musically compatible, but the chemistry will happen or not when they meet. So there were various very talented people that Rob didn't take to. I'm sure I won't upset him by telling this story, but someone I really loved, who I thought was an absolutely brilliant writer, was Ian Brodie. I'd A&R'd his band, Original Mirrors, and he was having a lot of success with the Lightning Seeds, and he was using Pete Townshend's studio on the Thames, so he had a nice location. So I introduced that idea to Rob. Rob went down there. About 3:00, the phone rings. It's Ian. He said, Rob went out for a walk about 3 hours ago and hasn't come back. Right. I thought, oh, that hasn't worked out then. And with that's no cloud over Ian.
No.
It's just Rob makes his mind up very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, one of Rob's better ones was he'd met the band, the Long Pigs, and Richard Hawley.
Yeah.
Was it Richard?
Yeah.
So they went up to Sheffield. So Rob went up to Sheffield on his own to write with Richard, not Crispin. I think it was just Richard.
Yeah.
I remember this correctly.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just Richard. Yeah.
I'm sure it was Richard, and Richard's lovely. And Rob's got there, and at some point in the evening, Keith Allen and Bez have turned up.
Oh dear.
With a bag of party stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Rob's decided that's not for him. And he called me, and I've gone, "Where are you, Robbie?" He said, I'm just leaving Sheffield. I said, "You going back to the hotel?" He said, "No, I'm coming back to London." So you're in a cab? He went, "Yeah."
Oh,
So I got a cab back to London from Sheffield. It's just a very Rob thing to do. Like, in the studio thinking, "No, I don't want this." So we kissed frogs for a bit. And all the time, I've got various friends who look after writers, who either manage writers or publish writers, who I'm constantly chipping away at. So there's somebody I don't know or haven't thought of, or somebody suitable. And a lot of people said no.
Right.
Or a lot of people were in bands, and even though they were off cycle, maybe having a couple of years off between albums and tours, a lot of people didn't want to co-write. It wasn't such a big thing in 1996, 97. Anyway, one of my close friends at the time was Paul Curran, who ran BMG Publishing, and he would send me periodically, 8 cassettes, and I'd dutifully listen to them, and I think, no. And then on about the third batch, he sent me, and I think by now, Rob's managed by David Enthoven and Tim Clark.
Yeah.
right.
So I probably did, I don't know, fat end of a year on my own with Rob.
Right.
7 or 8 months. I couldn't tell you exactly how long. And Paul he's also friendly with Tim and David. So by now he's sending them the same stuff he's sending me. So in amongst the next batch is Guy. And I'm thinking, why hadn't I thought of Guy before? I know Guy. So, not well. So I put that one on first. And it's a couple of tracks off the Ill-Fated Lemon Trees album.
Yeah.
And I was A&Ring World Party at the time. I was working on an album called Egyptology, which I'd given to Rob, and he liked it.
Right.
So a sort of penny dropped. Guy and Carl had worked in World Party together, but had fallen out. Carl's a one-off. Very, very talented. A great writer. But he didn't want it. I think I may have talked to Carl about Rob. He didn't want to do anything outside of World Party.
No.
So I called David and I said, have you had some, because this is the years. I said, have you had some writer cassettes from Paul? I said, this Guy Chambers one's good. I said, it's the best thing we've had for a long time. And we go, let's give Guy a go.
Yeah.
By now, I don't know, half a dozen have fallen. Every now and then you get really lucky, it works straight away. So we put them in together to write, and it just clicked. They're chalk and cheese. They couldn't be more different as people. You wouldn't, if you'd met Rob and spent any time with him, and you'd met Guy and spent any time with him, you wouldn't automatically think these two people, marriage made in heaven.
Yeah.
They're as different as in every respect as it's almost possible to be. But then I'd worked with people where I remember meeting Elton John and Bernie Taupin together.
Yeah.
They're very different people. And it wasn't unusual for people to be in bands together and have great creativity and not have much in common outside of that.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a great surprise. Anyway, that's what you're trying to do all the time. So unless you've got a band, it's even rarer than ever now. But when I started doing this, you only signed self-contained projects. So as an A&R guy, you were looking for someone who wrote their own hits. I'd drop dead of shock if someone came in these days who could write their own hits by themselves and play them and record them. It does happen, but it's not the norm.
Bit of a bluebird.
Back then, if someone couldn't write their own songs, you didn't sign them.
Yeah.
Right.
If you needed to go outside, that was a pop world that none of us were really involved in. And it was a sort of a specialist subject. There were like two separate businesses.
Yeah.
So whatever Mickey Most was brilliant at, wasn't something that I got involved in. I was working at Chrysalis. Their history was rock bands.
Mm-hmm.
So you were looking for that self-contained thing. I think I alluded to this earlier. So my instinct with Rob was to build something around that.
Mm-hmm.
Rob had written, JF, bored and frustrated by the fact that Rob didn't like anybody. JF had the patience of a moth also. And so JF was, baby, I have something organized for you. You know, you and Rob are obviously fucking around, doing nothing. So I'm sending you to Miami to work with Desmond Child. So I called Rob. I said, JF wants us to go to Miami and work with Desmond Child. And Rob's like, fuck off. I don't want to do that. And I said, well, it is Miami South Beach. And when you were doing the Freedom video, you did like the Marling Hotel, didn't you? Don't Models One have an office upstairs? He went, maybe. I said, why don't we treat this as a 10-day holiday?
Yeah.
Why don't we just go to Miami and have a nice time? And then maybe we'll go and, you know. I mean, Desmond is from a very, very different world. He's a very, very talented writer. But it wouldn't be anybody. You knowing them both, they're less compatible than it's almost possible to imagine as people.
Yeah.
And it's not what Rob's looking for. You know, in Rob's head, he's come through, he's been in Take That with all the Britpop stuff happening around him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he wants to be successful, but he wants to be who he would have been if he hadn't joined Take That.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I always used to think.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like, I think if Rob could have wiped Take That out,
Right.
and just been Robbie Williams from Stoke in a band.
Yeah.
Like if he'd have been the singer-writer in Cast,
Mm-hmm.
I think he'd have had a happy career doing that.
Yeah.
So for him, he probably didn't have that need just to jump on the first train that come along. He had time to shop around and.
But again, it's all very
Yeah.
instinctive. He intuitively took something. Something happened with him and Guy, and they wrote. It was instant results. So anyway, I'm afraid I'm going back in time now. So this is when Tim is still managing Rob. Tim doesn't come with us. Rob and myself fly to Miami, go and meet Desmond. Nothing against Desmond, but I can tell straight away that they're not going to get on.
Yeah.
And they write for three. We'd get up, have breakfast, and wander about South Beach. There was a cafe. Was it called the Telegraph Cafe? We used to go to this cafe for breakfast because the hotel was chaos. It was a lovely hotel, but the people that ran it were so smashed all the time. You get up and you think, oh, the staff aren't up yet. And we used to go out to this cafe, and then there was a really good second-hand music shop, which is where I got an insight into Rob's love of hip-hop. So we would be buying a lot of, there'd be a lot of Tupac and a lot of Dr. Dre. And then we'd go around the sort of, the sort of street where, we go in the Stussy shop, we go in the, and there'd always be, there was one shop, there was a shop that a really pretty girl worked in that we seemed to go in and buy T-shirts every day. And then eventually we'd get ourselves over to Desmond's. Anyway, Rob didn't like what they were doing. And the one thing that worked is Desmond worked with the guy that co-wrote Old Before I Die, whose name's just decided to leave me.
Eric Bazillion?
Eric Bazillion from the Hooters.
Yeah.
Who wrote If God Was One of Us for Joan Osborne.
Yeah.
Nice guy, actually. Anyway, he came down at the weekend of the week in which we hadn't got anything really from Desmond. And they wrote Old Before I Die, which I think Desmond gets a credit on because we were in his house.
Oh, okay.
I see.
And that's the first thing that's got a pulse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got that in our pocket. So fast forward to Guy. And Guy's written successfully with Rob. We've got a few things in very rough demo form, and we start talking about producers. And Guy says, well, I'd like a shot at producing this. I said, well, why don't you produce Old Before I Die as a sort of, I hate to use the word test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we booked West Side, and then in the meantime, Guy has called Steve Power, who I've met years before at Hamby's studio in Liverpool, the Pink Museum.
Mm-hmm.
No longer with us, Hamby, sadly. He was a bit of a character. And as I said, Steve had recorded the first version of Wonderful Life, Black, which I'd signed to A&M. So I knew who Steve was. I don't think, have we met? We might have met in Liverpool briefly, but I knew that Steve was a very good recording engineer and had produced. So Guy said, I'd like Steve Power to be involved. You know, let us produce something. So the one thing we had that was obviously a hit was Old Before I Die. So they did that. And I mean, Guy had never produced before. I mean, this is not, but it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just worked. And in this spirit of putting a team together, and by this time we'd done some demos at Steve McEwen. Some of the demos we'd done at Steve McEwen's studio. Steve was the guitarist in World Party.
Right.
Guy's friend Phil Eisler, who was really a guitarist, played bass and some guitar. Steve's a very good singer and a guitarist. Our first idea for a drummer was Jeff Dugmore.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew, I think Guy had worked, Chris Sharrock was in the Icicle Works briefly in Liverpool. And because from about the age of 15, Guy did sessions in Liverpool.
Yeah.
He knew a lot of Liverpool musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about drummers. So this is, we're putting a band together
Yeah.
to extend this group of people that are going to stick together and work together. I think we talked about Zach Starkey,
Mm-hmm.
but he was committed to The Who. And then we talked about Chris Sharrock, but he was still contracted to the Lightning Seeds.
Right.
And then Zach recommended Smiler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Put him on the show.
yeah, really nice bloke. So he did the early touring. Chris did the drumming on the record. Chris played, actually there's a couple of, Jeff Dugmore's on Life Thru A Lens.
Mm-hmm.
Did Jeff play on, Jeff might be on Lazy Days.
Yeah. I think
That might be Jeff.
Yeah. I think maybe
I'd have to
Let
look
Me
it up.
Entertain You as well, maybe.
But Chris Sharrock did most of it. And there was a group of people that Guy knew as well. So we had the overlap with World Party, which is starting to annoy Carl. So Dave Catlin Birch, who's Paul McCartney in the Bootleg Beatles,
Right.
is the bass player in World Party and a friend of Guy's. So the band that we put together for Life Thru A Lens has some overlap with World Party because Guy's been in World Party.
Oh, right.
Dave Catlin Birch is still in World Party. Steve McEwen is touring. Carl would do a lot of the recording by himself. So a lot of the musicians that were in World Party weren't playing on the World, they weren't actually. Carl was the sort of nocturnal hermit. He had a studio above John Henry's rehearsal rooms called Seaview. And if I wanted to see Carl to talk about the record, I'd have to go there about 10 at night, which is when he got up. Anyway, so in Carl's mind, we've nicked his band, I think. It was less he's even less pleased with me when we do She's the
Yeah, I
One.
can imagine.
He called me and Guy and called us everything he could think of calling us. But then the check must have cheered him up. So various, I think Jeff Dugmore had a commitment to Johnny Halliday. Sharrock had a commitment to the Lightning Seeds. And Smiley's a really good drummer. Smiley.
Yeah.
Smiley, yeah. Sorry, what did I say before?
Smiler.
Like Smiley. So we put a band together to record, and some of them couldn't commit to touring.
Mm-hmm.
So in the studio at this point, Guy plays guitar and most of the keyboards. Phil plays bass or guitar, and we get Dave Catlin Birch in as much as anything for his voice, because the backing vocals, that blend of Steve, McEwen, and Dave, And also the guy that's George Harrison in the Bootleg Beatles, whose name I can't remember. And that's the backing vocals on Life Thru a Lens, or the male backing vocals. And the idea is to keep a core group.
Yeah.
So we only have, really, I suppose, and also Guy can't play 2 guitars and keyboards on the road like he has done on the record.
Yeah.
So we need musicians to play Guy's parts. So that's how that evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And you're basically trying to operate like a band.
Yeah.
And it's a band called Robbie Williams.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the theory, which I'll still stick to, is if people have that talent and that link to each other, they'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and what happens all the time in 2023 is young artists go in with writers, make a connection, but then that writer's in with Lewis Capaldi next week.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Lippard the week after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not the same.
So finding someone that wants that life, and not everybody wants to go on the road.
No.
I mean, it was, in many ways, I think what contributed to the demise was, I mean, EMI in their wildest dreams didn't think it would take off the way it did. And of course, no one's been here before. So the writing together, touring together, recording together. So they book a holiday and they'll be like, "Ooh, we need to put the second album out by so-so." So, what would have been a nice break in Jamaica turns into a writing trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they literally lived and did, it was, I think it's just, with the benefit of hindsight, it's too much.
Mm.
It's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as success affects people differently, I mean, something that pops into my mind is coming out of the Albert Hall after this Swing When You're Winning Albert Hall show.
Yeah.
Probably with Gary, the security guy, and Rob and a couple other people. And we're just looking for a taxi on the street. And there's a Bentley at the stage door. And Guy comes out and gets in the Bentley. And we all just spontaneously start laughing. Not in a horrible way.
No, but it's funny.
It's funny.
Yeah.
And that's Guy. That's where Guy's gone
Yeah.
with success. Whereas Rob's just getting a cab back to his flat. I don't know if that expresses something to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
About them. You can't see me doing this, but this is starting to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
They're different.
Yeah.
And they evolve differently as things get bigger.
Yeah. And you've also said that it's a myth that everything was a struggle and there was a series of flops until Angel saved the day. You, Tim and David, planned to build Rob's career slowly, but not everyone at the record company agreed.
Oh, the record company wanted to drop Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one. I see the thing. David and myself are both we're like people that worked at Island Records in the 60s.
Yeah.
So we're doing. It might, in EMI's minds, might have just been pop, but we're doing it like it's Roxy Music or King
Right.
Crimson or
Yeah.
The Who. Or, you know what I mean? We're doing it what we think is properly.
Yes.
We're building something to last.
Yeah.
Not just have a few hits,
Yeah.
blow up, move on.
Yeah.
And I've known David since I was 18.
Right.
I booked King Crimson with Paul Conroy at Ewell. I think we paid them £75. And David was in my life from that day.
Right.
Not every year,
Mm-hmm.
but my sister married John Wetton, who was the bass player that went between Roxy Music and King Crimson. Really talented man. Tragically no longer with us. Unbelievably talented musician. Fantastic bass player. So, yeah, David was swinging it out of my life. I mean, there's a reason David ended up being Rob's manager, for sure. So, yeah, exactly that. we put Old Before I Die out first.
Yeah.
But I think we were quite surprised it was as big a hit as it was. But because Rob was so famous for being Rob,
Yeah.
it's you can't generalize any of this stuff. I know people love to,
Yeah.
particularly now we've got data. People love a simple answer. There is no simple answer, And putting music in genres is also pointless because nothing ever quite fits. So, and also, we know we've made the record. I mean, literally, we weren't waiting outside to go to rehab when he finished the vocals, but it felt like that. Right. So Rob, David and myself David had helped me. This is how it rolls. And the Rob's lawyer, Anne Harrison, had put it in my head because she was Rob's lawyer. She knew what the issues were. I don't know, behind the scenes. And Anne had said to me, it was EMI, when Rob fired Tim in Miami. So Tim left a long message on Rob's hotel room phone. And whatever he said, Rob called him back and fired him. And then when I woke up the next morning, Rob said, I fired Tim last night. So
Oh, God.
that panicked JF so much he got on a plane and came out to see us. I said, oh. Yeah, he said, it's not going to work. But he didn't know, I mean, that's Rob.
Yeah.
I didn't phone, didn't say, oh, hi, Chris. The representative of my record label sat in two rooms down the corridor. Can we have a chat about it? I'm thinking of firing my manager. No. He just picked up the phone, fired him, and then told me in the morning. Fantastic. So, yeah, JF's like so spooked he gets on a plane. And JF doesn't understand why Desmond isn't working. Yeah, it was fairly chaotic. Anyway, fast forward. David and myself want to lay some foundations. So we want to do some gigs. And we want the band to be good. We don't want it to be rubbish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we did things like radios and TVs, and Guy was of the same mind, we'd take the tapes away and fix everything. Because, everything leaves a shadow.
Yeah.
They didn't want anything to be shit. Because either it had been badly recorded by a radio station who didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or someone had an off night.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck with it sounding bad forever. So we were incredibly anal about everything that went out as a radio session or TVs. We meticulously fixed everything live that we did. And Guy is a fantastic musician. He's a really, he's of an incredibly high standard. And he pushes. He was quite a difficult MD, in rehearsal.
Yeah.
Guy's not cracking jokes. Anyway, the band were good. And it was a very good band very quickly. And because we're conscious we're dealing with the sort of, the cool police. And at EMI, you've got a mixture. So you've got the cool police who don't want it to work anyway. And so, it's not like it's been a disaster. Before I Die did they get to number 2?
2, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we put out Lazy Days, which, considering he was in rehab and couldn't do any promo,
Yeah.
Yeah.
smuggling him out for a day to shoot a video. I'd been in the same rehab, so luckily we knew everybody. But there wasn't, it wasn't wall-to-wall promo. And then obviously, because he's not mended, I suppose is the right word, we put South of the Border out as a holding single. And I remember saying to David at the time, I said, it's a good song, but it's not a hit. It'll perform because he's got a fan base.
Yeah.
But that won't.
Wasn't it supposed to be Let Me Entertain You?
Well, no, we was holding that back.
Right, okay.
Right.
Because we wanted a fully... Let Me Entertain You and Angels were the obvious big ones.
Yeah.
And we wanted a fully fit Rob who'd be available to do everything.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd explain this to a couple of meetings at EMI,
Yeah.
and I think a couple of people were with me, but anyway, no one's come to me and gone, this is shit, it's not working. And that's obviously, there are people inside EMI who think that. And luckily for me, the overall boss of Europe by this point is Rupert Perry, who's based in London and who JF reports to. And I'd worked with Rupert in the late 70s, my first time around at EMI. And we had a bond. Not that he wouldn't have got rid of me if I'd have screwed up, but Rupert, Rupert's PA calls me. Rupert would like to see you. I thought, oh shit, I'm going to get fired, which is always your first thought, right? And the CEO wants to see you. Yeah. Are you free at 2? Oh, it's 11. I'm going to get shot. Anyway, so I go up to see Rupert, imagining I'm just going to be fired. And Rupert goes, Briggs, Robbie Williams. He said, any more hits on this record? I said, why? He said, well, it's been out for however many months it has been out. I said, you've done about 40,000 albums. The last single was a stiff. I thought, well, it wasn't a complete stiff. Where did it get to? 11?
I think, 11, something like that.
It didn't make the top 10.
No.
But see, David and myself in our Island Records 1968 Fairyland weren't bothered by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We kind of knew that's what was going to happen. It was a holding track.
Right.
There weren't, the 2 hits were Let Me Entertain You and Angels.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to put those out.
Until he was fit.
Until, Rob looked like Rob and could handle all the promo that wouldn't send him spiralling back, to Drunk World. And we were right. Anyway, it turns out that there'd been a delegation to Rupert that, I don't know what the fuck Chris thinks he's doing, wasting our time and our money with this. And there was a big enough group inside EMI, I think principally sales guy, who just wanted him dropped. Didn't believe in it, didn't get it. So I played Rupert, who hadn't listened to the album.
Right.
Let Me Entertain You and Angels. Don't honestly think he got it. But because we had history, I think you can see it sometimes in a room.
Yeah.
Like when you've got that job and you're making 100 decisions a day, when there are people bugging you to spend £500,000 doing something and you've got to say yes or no, he's just looked at me and gone, yes. He's just backed me.
Wow.
And it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank goodness.
But, can you think of the number of people in that building that were working on that project that had heard Angels and Let Me Entertain You? Thought, this is fucking rubbish. Let's drop him.
Yeah. They obviously hadn't listened to it.
Welcome to the record business.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robbie Williams, and you're listening to Robbie Williams Rewind with the Champions.
Was it very purposely planned that Rob played in small venues on his first couple of solo tours before doing the festival circuit and then moving into arenas? Was that sort of a gradual
Well, we didn't have enough songs to do like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It was like we had an album's worth of songs.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
And some B-sides. And again, it's just how David and myself particularly, and Tim, Tim had been the managing director of Island Records. I think we were the product of our upbringing.
Yeah.
And the slow build. We liked the idea, and I remember, this goes all the way back, I remember having conversations with Jake Rivera and Dave Robinson at Stiff, when they would always keep Elvis Costello a level below what he could sell out. Because there'd be queues. And you'd be, it was like a...
Yeah.
We were happier if, there were 400 or 500 people who couldn't get tickets.
Right, okay.
Than to be playing somewhere with 300 empty seats.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
And that was a philosophy that we all. I think also the record business has been. I couldn't give you a date, but I'd grown up in the same. I'm a few years younger than David and Tim, but I'm the same sort of generation musically, and we'd grown up with that sort of philosophy that you build it carefully. You don't punt. You don't put a tour on sale thinking, I hope we sell out.
Yeah.
You put a tour on sale that we're going to sell this out easily.
Okay.
Right? And the buzz that will create,
Yeah.
we'll build on that.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a long-term project.
Yeah.
We saw it that way because that's the way we were brought up.
Yeah.
It's hard work. If you find somebody really, really talented, right? Don't just piss it away chasing 3 or 4 pop hits and playing out of your depth, right?
Yeah.
When you're not good enough live yet or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, get good.
Yeah.
And the whole point of doing those smaller venues is you're practicing. You're doing your 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time you're doing a festival, you're reaching the people at the back
Yeah.
because you've learned how to do it. I see so many people that have had hits that have been sort of nurtured in writing rooms. And like even doing promo on telly, they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Or you see them at the O2 and you think, you're getting about 10 rows down. But it's like there's to be able to perform the way Rob performs. I mean, a lot of it is God-given talent.
Yeah.
But he's learnt to do that by doing it
Yeah.
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah. And I heard you say on one of your previous interviews that he connects with every person. He has that ability to connect with every person in a stadium or wherever he is. We certainly feel that as fans, and a lot of people talk about that.
It's something I kind of look for. I mean, when we were doing Freedom, which is completely bonkers, with Stephen Hague at Rack, we've gone out for some fresh air, and I think there was a Café Rouge. They've all gone now, haven't they? Café Rouge.
There's a few left.
Yeah, we're walking up to Café Rouge on St John's Wood High Street to get a coffee and some sort of late breakfast. And we've left Ant, the famous Ant, back at the studio with Stephen Hague. Good luck, Stephen. And Ant's great, but he wasn't so great then. And halfway up the side street, there's a woman and a teenage girl and a baby in a pushchair, And as they get closer, Mum, not the teenage daughter, Mum, literally like elbows me in the ribs out the way to get me to put 2 yards between me and Rob, so her and teenage daughter can insert themselves.
Right.
It's called charisma, isn't it? And I mean, you can't teach somebody that.
No.
But I work with Tom Grennan, and he has that ability to speak to the room.
Yes.
As if he's speaking to you.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I can probably list a few other people that can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I saw him first back in '98 at Glastonbury, and I'm not sure that anybody knew how that was really going to go down, but it certainly went down well, and we've seen him obviously ever since. So
was that the first show you saw?
That was my first live show, of his, yeah.
I went to the 97 tour, the first tour.
Yeah.
All right. The first gig we did in the Guy Chambers era was the Hammersmith Palais. And David and myself are literally standing outside wondering if anyone's going to turn up.
I was at that gig.
Were you at it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I don't think I've met anyone else that was there except us.
Oh.
We were really in the dark at that point. I mean, we knew we were on the right track, but anyway, Hammersmith Palais, we were literally pacing. David still smoked. I think I'd given up smoking by then. And we were pacing outside. We needed 200 or 300 people.
Yeah.
And the walk-up was fantastic. Weren't many blokes there.
Not in those days, no.
Does that all make sense, that idea of forming a band and calling it Robbie Williams?
Absolutely, it does.
Instead of just going down the sort of PWL. I think what people at EMI expected is that we'd go down to PWL, get a couple of songs.
Yeah.
We go down to Rose and Foster, get a couple of songs. That we'd just be in with the pot writers.
Yeah.
None of them believed,
Yeah.
despite the evidence, that Rob was a writer.
Yeah.
They just saw him like a leaving member of Take That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone would see the leaving member in Little Mix.
Yeah.
And there were an awful lot of people that thought, like, if you weren't Radiohead, you weren't cool.
Yeah. It must have been hard as well, because the press were having a field day about it, and you know, even though you're probably ignoring that at the time, there's all that going on, just being inserted into the British psyche of, people were listening to it and believing the stupid stories that were coming out. And of course, you were there still diligently trying to build and and I think that says something about his. Well, it says everything about his longevity and his confidence as a creative artist as well, because he wasn't just a one-hit wonder or just someone who was famous for being in a boy band. Actually, I think people realised and started to see in the end, no, all of this crap that's going on in the papers and media is not true.
People tried to kill us.
Yeah.
Must
I
have
don't give
really...
a flying fuck what the media think.
No.
Just what's in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, he wouldn't be such a part of the British institution if you didn't do all that early foundational work.
No.
He wouldn't be doing. I'm not sure he would still be doing it.
In my
today.
experience, unless you're prepared to do that, Tom Grennan as an example, his management understand that, and he's done that. So he's done festivals and got to a decent point before he's had a big hit. So that he's good at his job. So when the success comes, he's already turned pro. He's not still semi-pro.
No.
I see so much. You just think, live.
It makes so much sense, but it doesn't. It sounds as though it doesn't happen very often these days.
I think
anyway.
people can be involved with great record making and have no skills outside that. To do the promo or perform live to an audience. You've got to get all these things right. Then you might have a shot at hanging around for a bit.
So, just before we wrap up this episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. And also, Lucy and I would really appreciate it if you can leave us a star rating. You can do this on both Apple and Spotify podcasts. We would also love it if you could write us a short review, and you can do this on Apple. Don't forget, you can check out our episode notes for each episode and links to all tracks and videos at robbiewilliamsrewind.com. You can also email us at email@robbiewilliamsrewind.com. Please also follow and chat on our social channels. It's at RewindRobbie on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. And you can also like and follow our Facebook page, Robbie Williams Rewind. And before we return to this episode, you might also consider sending us one of your own Robbie stories for the show. Just record a short audio clip on your phone and email it to us. Please check the website for more details. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robbie Williams, and you're listening to Robbie Williams Rewind with the Champions.
So Steve Power described Guy as a kitchen sink producer. How did you used to keep control of the budget when Rob or Guy wanted to throw everything at it?
By pretending I was going to do something about calling George Harrison. So, in the middle of recording Angels, where we are on quite a tight budget on Life Thru A Lens because for some reason JF has paid Desmond Child for doing not very much. So we made Life Thru A Lens on what would be considered the cheap. So Guy, we're recording Angels, and I mean things are like, I had a Gibson SG Junior guitar, which is very good for slide. Gary Nuttall didn't have; he only had one guitar, I think, to his name at this point. So I bought my guitar, and rather than hire something and spend another £100, I lent them my guitar for the week. And it's the perfect guitar. And Gary can play that part. But in Guy's head, we're going to get George Harrison down to do it. Right. So how we managed that was by me ignoring any of Guy's more grandiose requests.
Okay.
But in a way, like I looked like I was doing something about it.
Right.
So, and then I'd get Steve Power to fix things.
That's funny.
Brilliant.
So yeah, there's a bit of man management involved in that.
Robbie Williams Rewind.